My name is Alex Turnbow, and I'm a graduate assistant in the Student Academic Resource Center. We do workshops and tutoring. How many of you have ever utilized any of SARC's resources before? Okay, so a few of you. That's good. We're located in Howard Phillips Hall, a great resource for studying. So these are the things we're going to talk about today. We'll learn a little bit about the Student Academic Resource Center. I'm going to show you all a short video that kind of overviews all of our resources. For those of you that don't utilize SARC, we do tutoring and workshops like this one. We have a new program. It's academic coaching, so you'll meet one-on-one with an academic coach. Christine is actually one of our coaches. Then we'll learn about some different types of studying and some test prep, and then we'll have some question and answers at the end if you have any. So these are the main services that SARC offers. So workshops I mentioned, learning skills consultations, they're kind of one-on-one meetings with a graduate assistant, so it'd be me or one of the others, to kind of tailor the session to your time management needs, your study skills, to kind of help you improve your semester. So I'll show the video now.
CS Student Academic Research Center, also known as SARC. SARC provides students with tutorial assistance, supplemental instruction, learning skills consultations, academic success workshops, and online resources. Peer tutoring is offered every semester and provides assistance to students in STEM and business courses and other subjects. All sessions are free, typically in a group setting, and do not require an appointment. The SARC Tutoring Lab is located in room 115 of Howard Phillips Hall. SARC tutors are also available at 2 satellite locations on campus, the Veterans Academic Resource Center and the Lab of the College of Engineering and Computer Science. The Veterans Academic Resource Center is located near the CFE Arena. Tutoring for engineering courses takes place in the College of Engineering and Computer Science Lab, located in room 281 of the Engineering 1 building.
If you need help with your grades or you need help with your classes or learning material, come to SARC. I, for one, was not successful when I first came here to UCF for my studying. I went through my own study practices, but it wasn't enough to actually do well. It wasn't until I did organic chemistry, in which I was doing really bad in class initially. I got a D on the first test. I started going to tutoring every week, and I got an A on one of my tests, and eventually got an A in the total class.
Supplemental Instruction, or SI, is a series of free weekly sessions for students taking difficult courses. An SI leader, who has previously taken the course and earned an A, guides students through the course content. SI leaders attend class lectures and provide interactive study groups to help students develop effective ways to master the course material.
Vestibulocochlear. My experience as an SI leader at SARC has been the best I've ever had at UCF. I've helped so many students out, I've met so many different people, and I've had so much fun doing this job. One of the things SARC offers is what's known as Study Union, and what that is when you convert the student union into a final exam review paradise, basically. We have exam reviews, free stuff, so it's a great way for students to help relax and study during finals week.
I believe SARC is accessible and available. Students will hear things from other students that they won't hear from me. And it's not because I lie to them, it's because I just occupy a different position. And many students will go and ask a peer tutor over at the SARC Center or an SI leader who is somebody who took the course just recently themselves. They'll ask them questions that they don't quite feel comfortable approaching the instructor with. And I guess that's a real advantage.
Students who want more individualized attention can set up an appointment for a learning skills consultation. These are 1-hour-long meetings with a SARC learning specialist to address any concerns about academics. The learning specialist will assist the student in creating personalized plans for success and provide valuable tips for implementing strategies such as setting goals and creating time management schedules. Every semester, SARC publishes a schedule of academic success workshops. These are 1-hour-long interactive sessions that provide students with the opportunity to sharpen study skills such as time management, test preparation, and reducing test-taking anxiety. This is a free service to students who can attend on a drop-in basis with no need to RSVP. Students who are unable to attend regularly scheduled peer tutoring or SI sessions at the Orlando campus can access SARC services through the SARC website and SARC Online. Here, students can find tutorials, learning skills and course-specific resources, as well as online peer-assisted learning, or OPAL. OPAL sessions are free, real-time online study groups led by a SARC peer tutor or SI leader and only require a computer with internet access. Schedules for peer tutoring, supplemental instruction, academic success workshops, and OPAL sessions can be found on the SARC website and Facebook page. Hard copies are available in the SARC main office and tutoring lab.
SARC has impacted me personally by allowing me to network with other people. They've really showed me how to study. I would tell people to go to SARC because it is more like an investment for yourself, and by going to SARC, you're really increasing your comprehension of the material.
Taking that hour out of the day just to go and force yourself to be there and study and be with your friends, I think it's really worth it. And then it does pay off. You actually get results compared to times where I haven't gone to SARC or haven't gone to an SI session. You kind of really get to make that bond with people and really master the material, because that's what we're here for, is to learn.
Okay, so as y'all see, we have a lot of resources, some that could be helpful for your different classes, because even if we don't offer tutoring for a specific class you're in, you could do the learning skills consultation to kind of get that one-on-one personalized help, or you could attend a workshop like this one to kind of help improve your study skills and test prep. So there are a lot of different ways to get your needs met, even if we don't teach one of your classes, or if we don't support one of your classes. So we're going to learn about the different types of studying, and not necessarily like note cards versus like cramming, but different ways to learn. So these are the overview. So we're going to learn about studying to gather information, kind of learn what is in your textbooks, what you need to know. Then we're going to learn about studying to learn the information, studying to check for learning, and then to refresh, because if you studied something back in August or September, you're not going to remember it by the time your final comes up in December if you don't kind of refresh your learning. And then studying to improve your learning skills, to kind of improve how you study. So the 5 types of studying, they're most effective when you start at the beginning. If you start doing these things from the first week of class, you won't have to cram at the end, kind of studying through the semester instead of waiting till the end of the semester. So when you're trying to figure out what you need to learn, you can look at the lecture, what your professor says during lecture, or the PowerPoints. A lot of professors post PowerPoints before the class, so you could go ahead and print that out, and then you could take notes from the PowerPoints instead of writing down everything that's said on the PowerPoint. You could write more what the professor's saying. And then chapter notes. How many of you take notes while you're reading your textbook? Okay, a very small handful. So when you're reading a whole chapter, that's a lot of information. You're not going to retain everything. But if you take notes as you read along, it can kind of jog your memory, say, oh, that's what this paragraph was about, or that's what this section was about, so you don't have to reread the chapter again at the end to figure out what you actually read. Also, a lot of professors give out study guides. Sometimes those are present from the first day of class. So you can look at the study guide in the beginning to learn what you need to know about each chapter instead of waiting till the end to go back and review that study guide. The organize, condense, and record, that's kind of about the different kinds of formats. So some people just write everything down. Some people do a thing that's called Cornell notes. I'll show you an example of that towards the end. But it kind of like splits your paper in half, and you kind of write main ideas and themes on the left side of your page, and then all the information on the right side of the page. So it's just a different way to organize your notes. Some people really like note cards, whether it's for vocabulary or if they're writing down like test questions and answers, lists. So note cards can be a good way to keep track of the information you've learned. And they can be paper note cards, it can be online note cards, whichever format that you think is helpful for you. And the point of all of this is to get a complete and accurate set of information you need to know, combining the textbook and the lecture, what the professor says, and the PowerPoint, so you can kind of combine all of the information you need together. How many of you have TAs in your classes, teachers assistants? There are a lot for some classes. So not only can you ask the professor questions, you can ask the TA as well. So that's two resources you have to get you the same information. Maybe one of them explains it a little differently than the other. So that's just someone else you can go to. And you can confirm with the professor or the TA that the information you've read is accurate, but you can also talk with your classmates. You can ask them questions. You can compare notes. Maybe you didn't understand something the professor said, but your classmate understood it a little better, so they can help you to facilitate the learning as well. Studying to learn information. So that's to try to move information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. When you hear something one time, it doesn't necessarily go to your long-term memory. You kind of have to repeat the information. So the repeated recitation, you have to recite information over and over. Repeat that information to yourself. Some people like to read out loud. So instead of just reading through your notes, if you read it out loud, you're seeing it and you're hearing it. So that can be a way to get it into your long-term memory faster. You can study in study groups, so kind of talking out the information, asking each other questions, kind of hearing it and talking it out, explaining it to others. That can be a way to learn the information. Then you can sort what you've learned and what you haven't. If you're reciting things out loud and then you stop, say maybe you don't know anything about a certain section, then you know that you should probably review that section again. You don't know as much about it as the previous section. Or if something you got was wrong. So if you're reciting it to a classmate and they're like, that's not really right, so you know you need to go back and review that portion again. How many of you have used study groups? Okay, still only a few of you. Do the rest of you prefer to study on your own? Like to study by yourself? Either way, it's fine. It's whichever works best for your learning. Next, you need to define your priorities. Figure out what's most important to you. Is it school? Is it work? Family time could be another. Time with your friends or your significant other. All of those things take up time, so you have to figure out which way is best for you. So in a minute, we're going to pass out some full week schedulers, so you can kind of plan out a typical week for you. You write in your classes, and then you would figure out when you have time to study. So we'll go on. Another thing that's talked about is memorization versus understanding. So who can tell me like the difference?
You memorize something, like I could memorize everybody's name in this room,
Mm-hmm.
and not really understand what I saw.
Right.
Or what I
Right, heard. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just because you can repeat something back, you may not know what you're repeating back. So the first one is memorizing. You're trying to learn ideas and concepts word for word only, and you can't explain it to others. But if you understand it, you wouldn't have to see it word for word, like on a test question. If you studied it one way, but a professor tests you a different way, if you didn't understand the material, you would probably miss it because you didn't understand. You were just memorizing like that phrase or that sentence. For another one is how to apply it in real life situations. If you memorize something, you may not be able to see how it applies to a real world situation if it's just like a word problem. But if you understand it, you can explain it to someone else in like relative terms. Say like, this is what would happen in real life if this scenario happened. If you memorized it, you wouldn't see like the differences and similarities, but if you understood it, you can kind of connect things. Maybe you learned something in chapter 4 that you're connecting to chapter 1. So sometimes the information builds on one another. If you're making those connections and connecting ideas, then you probably understand the material more. If you memorize it, you have trouble seeing beyond like the main idea. You just read that sentence like as it is. But if you understand it, it kind of like starts like a wheel in your brain. You're like, oh, well that makes sense because of this, this, and this. So I actually have a few copies of, there's some more memorizing versus understanding. If y'all want that at the end, you can come up and get it. But then we're going to do the worksheet. So first you're going to put in your classes, whenever those may be. And then you put in like your work, because most people know their work schedules for the next week. If you work, some people like to work out. If you work out like the same time every day, if you want to try to work out a few times a week, you can put that in. Food. A lot of people, when they're making a plan, they don't plan when they'll eat. And then they realize they're jam-packed all day and they have no time to eat lunch. So if you kind of plan in your schedule when you're going to eat, you're less likely to skip meals. Maybe you have extracurricular activities if you're in a sorority or a fraternity, or you have club meetings or organizations, football games, sports, things like that. You can add those in. And then after you've done all of that, then you'll see all of the free time you have. So if you are a morning person, maybe you wanted to fill in those morning gaps, like 8 to 10 or 8 to 9, 8 to 11, you can fit time to study. Maybe you're an evening. If you like the evening, maybe you're going to try to do it from like 6 to 10 or 9 to 11, like when you get off work. So that all depends on what works best for you. If you know you're not a morning person, then you probably shouldn't schedule time to study at 8 a.m. Can you pass those up as well? So you know how you study best. If you're like falling asleep as soon as you get off work, you probably shouldn't schedule time to study at 9 o'clock when you get off work. So you have to plan this for what works best for you. So you can do this for next week if you want. You can do it like a typical week that you have. I only have a couple pens here if someone needs any. I'll get another one. So yeah, this can be really beneficial when you think that you don't have any time, like if you're a really busy person and you think, well, I don't have time to study, I don't have time to review. This can be a good way for you to visually see where the free time is that you may be spending watching Netflix or hanging out with friends. What are some things that keep you from studying? So you're saying procrastination. Well, what do you do when you're procrastinating?
I just do everything else but study.
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook.
Social media, that takes up a large part of a lot of people's time. You get on there to look at one thing, and next thing you know, you've been scrolling for 30 minutes, and then you move on to the next social media. So that can take up a lot of time that could have otherwise been spent studying. Another thing, when you fill these out, you see how they don't all just say study, study, study. They're a little more specific. So when you're writing out your plan, if you're planning to just go study, well then you get there and you don't know what you're supposed to study. You don't know which class you need to study for, or which assignments are due, or what you need to review. But if when you're planning, you write out what you're going to study for, like on Monday, study chapter 12 for math test on Wednesday. That's very specific. So once you sit down, you already have all your material, you know what you're going to study, so you can get on that. Whereas if you had just written study, you might sit down, you'll have to look up your syllabus or look up your planner, and it'll take a long time for you to figure out what it is you need to study. So it's good to be specific when you're planning out your study patterns. Does anyone have any questions about filling it out? What else takes up your time when you're supposed to be studying? Napping. Yep. You plan to lay down for like an hour. Next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by. Yep. That happens. How many of you go to bed about the same time every night? Okay, still only a few, so the rest of you, it just varies. Some days you go to bed early, some days you're up all night. Okay, so that can have an impact on your studying too. If you don't get enough sleep at night, you wake up, you're tired, you don't want to go to work, you don't want to go to class, you definitely don't want to study as soon as you wake up. So that can have an impact on how you feel as well. to the next one, I think. Y'all can keep filling those out if you're not finished. We're gonna move on. Oh, so see, this person even scheduled in computer time, when they're gonna watch TV, when they're gonna surf the internet, after they did their study time though. This is another form. I'll show you our website at the end where you can reach all of this stuff online if you're interested. I like this because then it kind of shows you your whole semester at once. So I use this for one of my classes so I can keep track of the hours that I do for it. So it can just visually breaks down how many weeks you have, how many days are left, when you're out of school. So it's a grade out. So this can be really beneficial if you want to look at the whole semester and kind of break down what you need to do for your different classes. It's called the Semester at a Glance. Okay, studying to check for learning. So the biggest thing we need to focus on here, you're trying to figure out what you have learned and what you haven't learned, because the parts you haven't learned are what you need to focus more on for the exams. Because if you understand something and you know it well, you should be spending more time on that section than the sections you don't understand. So it's good to know the test format beforehand. A lot of your professors will give you that information, whether it be like multiple choice. Some teachers may have just essay tests. You may have a Scantron, you may have fill in the blank. So all of that would help you in your studying because you can study in that format so you'd be prepared. You can even create your own exams and switch with friends. For those of you that mentioned you do study groups, you could all create your own pretend exam, switch them around to see how well you all do know the information. You could even just find a buddy, find one person in the class, say, hey, I really want to do a practice exam. Would you make one? Like, I'll make one for you. That could be a good way to, you don't know what they're going to put on there, so you don't, just like for your regular exams. And try to do that 2 to 3 times a week. If you study a little each day, you don't have to cram for 3 hours at once. If you study from the beginning of the semester kind of as you go, it makes it a lot easier at the end because there's not as much information that you don't know. When you're doing that, check for accuracy and completeness. Try not to leave anything blank because you know on a real exam you'd get a 0 for that one. Don't let yourself slide. The ones you missed, repeat those again. Add those onto your next practice exam, or go back and read that section again. Really focus on the ones that you didn't understand. And try to teach someone else. So if someone else in your class doesn't understand something, you try to explain it to them, because in explaining it, it may help you understand it more as well. They'll ask you questions, and if you're able to answer their questions, you kind of feel empowered. You're like, wow, I do know this information. I'm going to do great on this test. And then we have studying to refresh. So like I mentioned earlier, the material you learn at the beginning of the semester, that was a while ago. You've learned a lot of stuff since then, and that kind of takes place of the new information. Or the new information kind of takes place of the old information. So you need to kind of review the old stuff as well. You kind of beat the fading by reviewing the old material every few times a week as you go, so it doesn't just disappear. And revisit the learned material, and you can do that by yourself or with the study group. Maybe if you're in a study group, each one of you is responsible for a different chapter or a different couple of chapters. So y'all have to come up with a study guide for that and some practice questions. Then you combine all of your questions together for a real exam. Okay, what are some of the reasons you think that we forget? Anybody? You don't know why you forget? Yeah. Yep, you're overworking yourself. Maybe some of you don't know how to say no. You say yes to everything. Yes to shifts at work. Yes to family members. You have all these obligations, and you can't remember what it is you need to focus on. What are some other reasons why we forget?
You may not think it's that important.
Yeah, you may not think it's that important, so you don't look at it again. You don't know what you need to understand and remember. Anybody else? Yes.
Sometimes, like he said, mostly it's because you have so much going on that you tend to forget what it is that was top priority, like, you know, like the things that you have to do throughout the week.
Yeah, so maybe if you don't write everything down, the things that were most important may like fall to the bottom of your list. Those are all true. Here are some of the other reasons why we forget. So changed clues. So if you studied something a certain way, if you only read the book and you looked at the information in a table, if the professor asked you a question, like a word question, you wouldn't be seeing it in that table format anymore, so you may have forgotten what the answer was. But when you were studying, you got it right every time because you were practicing in that table. So what's important there, study your material in different ways. Rewrite your notes in your own words. If you rewrite it verbatim from the book, the professor may ask you, he may reword the question and write it in his own words, so you might not understand it as well. If you can do that in your own words, you'll know that you understand it and you're not just memorizing that section. Another is interference, like what a couple of them mentioned. Other things just pile up. They take place of what you were trying to remember or what you just learned. So you can't recall it as quickly. It's gotten buried under all the other things. Another is negative thinking. How many of you are really dreading finals? Only a few? So the rest of you, you're going to ace your finals? Well, a lot of people get really nervous towards this time of the semester. Maybe you're like borderline between like a C and a B or like a D and a C, and you know you really need to pass this course. So you start telling yourself like, wow, I'm going to fail. What am I going to do? Kind of this negative self-thinking. But when you do that, you're less likely to be successful than those students that tell themselves, kind of empower them and say, I am going to do this, I'm going to do well, I'm going to pass. When you kind of build yourself up, you get your self-confidence up, and you're more likely to do better on your exams. You've got to try to reprogram your brain to think like, I'm going to do well, I am focused, and I can do this. Another big one is underlearning. So you didn't really learn it to begin with, so that's why you're forgetting. So like if you don't read your textbook and you just go to class, listen to the lecture, you maybe take a few notes and then don't look at it again until like the test comes, then you didn't learn that information. You didn't review it, you didn't ask questions, you didn't read the book, kind of connect those ideas and those resources. So underlearning is a big factor for forgetting. And then disuse. So you mentioned some of it you may not have known was relevant information, so you didn't utilize it. You didn't use the information, you didn't review it, so you can't remember it if you don't review it. And the number 6 is similar to the negative thinking, the intention's lacking. So when you're studying, if you're not studying telling yourself like, I'm going to remember this, I'm studying so I can do well on the exam, kind of keep your goals in mind, it's easier to forget it. But when you kind of tie the studying to why you're doing it, like why you want to do well, it kind of makes it easier to remember because you have a goal in mind. And the last one is studying to improve your learning skills. So maybe you always use note cards. And that's what you've been doing since you were in high school, so you're still doing it now, making note cards for every exam. But then you get an exam back and you didn't do so well on it. It's helpful if you go through the exam to see which ones you missed. Maybe those certain questions, that information, note cards weren't helpful. So next time you'll know to kind of revise your study habits and do something different. Because if you know it's not working, you shouldn't do the same thing over and over because that's not helping you. So maybe you learn that study guides were helpful, or the practice exams, doing practice problems. Some people like practice problems from the book or the ones the professor gives you. Maybe that's not going to work for your class. So you have to be able to be like versatile and figure out which works for you. Recall what you were thinking during the test. Figure out like which questions caused you the most anxiety or which questions you like focused on the most, spent the most time. Those would be the ones you should review more in the future. And then you can utilize your resources. So we mentioned all of the SARC services we have. You can use those, the University Writing Center. If it's an English class or you're struggling with like essay tests or writing papers, they can help you out. SARC has some online resources I'll show you. Khan Academy, they have some other good resources online. You can also find other students in your class. Maybe there's a student who always gets an A on the test. They're always the one like preventing the curve. Find those students Get to know them, figure out what they're doing to study. And once you become friends with them, or you don't have to be friends with them, once you like tell them like, hey, I need help, show me like what you do, that can kind of give you some new ideas to figure out what works for you and what they're doing. And the TA, so if you have a teacher's assistant in your class, or even the professor, go ask them. Say, hey, I got this test back, can I meet with you to discuss it? Most professors are happy to do that. They'll like walk you through it and you'll figure out like why you missed it, and that can be really beneficial, developing that relationship with your professor or TA. Okay? Which one of these do you think is not where you should be studying? In your bed. How many of you do study in your bed? Okay, not that many. A lot of students do study in their bed though. They won't get home, they lay in bed and they review your notes. The problem with that is that your body and your mind register that it's time to go to sleep. So you're reading the notes and maybe you kind of doze off, and next thing you know, it's the next morning and you didn't study anything. It's a lot easier if you have a desk or at the table, or if you come to campus, there's a library and all-night study and a lot of little quiet areas in different buildings that are a lot better to study in than studying in your bed. It's also easier if you study at the same place every time you study, because then your mind kind of registers, wow, this is my study area, and you'll be more focused instead of distracted by whatever is going on around you. Okay, true or false? The average amount of time needed to effectively study for any exam, including finals, is about 2.5 hours. False. How many think false? And how many think true? No one thinks true? It is true. Because if you have prepared early, like preparing for the exams as you go through the semester, you won't have to study as much. You don't need 4-6 hours like cramming for these exams if you've studied a little, maybe an hour each day for your different classes, or 30 minutes each day. Just a little bit of a refresher, so you won't have to learn the material at the end. You'll just have to refresh your memory. Okay, how many of you get like anxious when you're about to take a test? A few of you? That's something that a lot of people deal with. They can't think and their mind starts racing, and then they get nervous that they're going to fail. So what are some things that you feel, for those of you who raised your hand, like how you know you're getting anxious for an exam? Yeah, some of you raised your hand. You were one of them.
Second guess yourself.
So you second guess yourself.
Study, but when you get there, you're like, I don't remember.
So you look at the first question, you're like, man, I don't know anything, I'm gonna fail, it was a waste of time studying, so all these racing thoughts. Anybody else? What makes you anxious about taking a test? Some people get anxious because they didn't study. They're like, wow, I didn't study the material, and now it's the exam, it's a big part of my grade. Their mind starts racing, thinking all these like awful things. If I fail the exam, I'm gonna fail the course, and then I'll have to repeat it next year, and then I'll have to tell my parents. So they just blow the situation out of proportion because they didn't prepare beforehand. So the reality is that it's really common on college students. It's a different transition from high school to college. They don't know how the professors are going to test. They don't know what material is going to be on there. So they get pretty anxious. So a lot of people do. It's not anything to be ashamed of because it is treatable. There are ways to reduce your anxiety. You can decrease with practice and some different techniques. We're going to talk about a few. The most common cause is the correlation between knowing and understanding. So like the sheet that I mentioned earlier, the memorizing versus understanding. If you are memorizing all the information, maybe you knew enough to pass the quizzes, but when it comes to exam time, you don't understand. So you didn't do so well on the exam, and you're really bummed. Think, man, I studied and I did well on the quizzes, but you didn't study enough to do well on the exam. So if you kind of look at that worksheet, figure out what you need to do to move more to the understanding phase, you'll be more likely to do well on the exams. And as knowledge and understanding increase, the test anxiety will decrease. So here's some ways to reduce anxiety. Find a mantra, like something that works for you, like a little motivational phrase. I know some people like put motivational quotes on their phone so they can look at them whenever. I've heard of people writing them on their mirrors or putting like a piece of paper on their mirror that had motivational things so they see it every day. So that can be good to reduce anxiety and kind of build up your confidence. Use them in class to calm yourself. So just say, I'm going to do well, even if it's something like that simple. I'm going to do well. So tell yourself that over and over to kind of eliminate the negative self-thinking and build up your confidence. Are there any quotes that any of you like tell yourself, or any of you like look at on your phone? No English majors, no quote people in here? I bet you all have some. You just don't realize that you tell yourself. Little things you like build yourself up through the day when you're getting nervous or you're scared. Kind of empowers you. Like I mentioned, the phone background. Maybe you write it in the inside of your notebook. So it's a notebook you use for all your classes, so you see it every day. On a computer screen, or maybe even in the car. Driving to and from class, you would see it. To and from work, so you'd be constantly reminded that you can do this. And these are some tips to reduce anxiety on test day. Arrive early. If you're running late, you're typically going to be anxious. You're like, I'm going to be late, the professor's going to shut the door, I'm going to get points off my exam. So that's one way that one thing that increases anxiety. Get settled. Make sure you have your books, your Scantron if it's needed, your eraser, like what if you're using a pencil and then you can't erase it because your eraser doesn't work. So that might make you really anxious. So just being prepared can help. And don't try to like cram the material right before your exam, because if you didn't know it an hour ago, then you're not going to know it now. And kind of look over the exam. Figure out which questions are harder and start with those. Or you could go through and do all the easy ones first and then spend your time on the hard ones when the remaining time, whichever works for you. And kind of visualize that space where you studied. Kind of bring yourself back to that area, whether it was your desk or in the library, to kind of refocus yourself and say, I do know this, I can do this. You can also do some deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation. So that's when you like kind of tense up and then you release. And then you tense everything up again and then release. Because then when you like release, you can feel it in your body. You feel more calm and more at ease. The deep breathing can be helpful to kind of center you, bring you back to the present, so your mind isn't racing as much. Kind of bring yourself back to just this exam. And then remember your mantra, think positive thoughts. Say, I'm going to do well. I'm going to do well in this class. I did study. I'm prepared. A few more. You mentioned second guessing yourself. So it's good to always go with your first instinct. You thought that for a reason. Unless you go through the exam and find another question that helps you answer the first one. That's the only time I would say like second guess yourself. Always go with your first instinct. And the one where I mentioned answer the harder ones, typically the harder ones are worth more points. So if you were able to get that one right, it would count for a lot more than if you got like maybe the true-false ones right, or the section that was worth the least amount of points. Or you can skip the hard ones, come back to them at the end, because maybe that would take up 20 minutes of your time working on this one problem, whereas the others you could get through pretty quickly. So then you wouldn't run out of time. But you don't want to leave any blank, because we know a blank answer, you definitely get a 0. Keep focused, take deep breaths when your mind starts to wander, bring yourself back, and take your time. You know at the beginning of the course how long you have to take your exam. So look at the clock and kind of time yourself throughout. You don't need to rush to get through it unless you're getting close to the end and you just need to answer all the questions. If someone else gets done before you, that's okay. The first person that gets done doesn't necessarily have the best grade. Maybe they went through just marking answers because they didn't study at all. So don't let those people that are packing up and leaving, don't let them make you nervous. If you're feeling really anxious, there are other resources that can help you. The Counseling and Psychological Services, CAPS, you can go to them and talk about anxiety. Maybe your anxiety is spilling over into other areas, not just test taking. So they can help you out. They also have a biofeedback training program, can kind of help you relax. You can look that up online. They also have little stress relief stops around campus. I know there's one in the SARC office. It's like a little massage chair, that you can reserve. They're free for like 15 minutes at a time, I think. So you can just come, kind of relax, get yourself a little mini massage, and then go on about your day. And like I said, if you do realize that the anxiety doesn't go away, it's spilling over into other things, you definitely can talk to someone about that. Okay, and those are like, there's our resources. Study Union is coming up. How many of you have heard of Study Union? Couple. You all should have your hands raised because it was in the video. But Study Union is something that SARC puts on every year. It's where a lot of the rooms in the student union, a lot of the big rooms like the Pegasus Ballroom and Key West Ballroom, they're transformed into study spaces. So they'll have SI leaders and tutors up, like talking and like prepping you for exams for different courses. The schedule should be posted on our website for Study Union. It's going to be the 3rd through the 10th of December. So look up to see if one of your classes is listed. It's a lot of like science courses that are on there. So look up your classes to see if they have a final exam review, because that can be really beneficial to you as well. Okay. Yes, so like writing all these things down won't necessarily, that we've learned through the presentation, won't like help you unless you actually utilize them, unless you actually go do them. Like I said, studying starts in the beginning. It makes it a lot easier if you're studying now instead of the day before your exams. Anyone have any questions? Anything they didn't understand? Nobody? Okay. Okay. So we're going to pass around some evaluations. I know some of you are here for specific classes or organizations. So at the top of it, it'll say who needs to know you were here. So that's where you would write in like who told you you had to come to this workshop. And then there are just some questions on it about the presentation. I would appreciate if y'all like filled it out. And then you're free to go. Also, if you wanted the rest of the tips for the memorizing and understanding, I do have some of those up here. If you would like a copy of those. There you go. And then some of you may have forms that you need me to sign. If so, if you could go in and go ahead and fill in all the other information other than like my signature. There's my name and my email. That's our office. The name of the workshop. So go ahead and fill that information in, and then I can just sign it.